Well, croeso nôl pawb.
Welcome back, everyone.
To this afternoon's session of our committee. We've had two evidence sessions this morning on a different area, but this afternoon we are focusing very much on sustainability of Welsh Bus Services, and we begin this afternoon with an evidence session with bus operators, where we've got about an hour of time with Scott Pearson, the chair of the Coach and Bus Association Cymru, and Aaron Hill, the director of Confederation of Passenger Transport Cymru as well. You're both very welcome indeed. We're looking forward to this session this afternoon. So later on, we'll be taking other evidence from local government and service users as well. But if we can begin, please, with Delith, if you want to open this session up for us.
Diolch yn fawr, Cadeirydd. Prynhawn da i'r
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon to both of you.
So it won't be because of anything that you've said. If you see me turn my camera off, so I just wanted to apologise to you in advance that I'll be leaving before the end. I wanted to ask you about what you think the current condition of Welsh local bus services is at the moment, and talk us through some of the pressures that are on the delivery of services at the moment, and maybe feeding that into why bus passenger numbers are in decline, or have been in decline.
Yeah, I'm happy to respond first to that one, Della. Thanks for that question. I suppose the starting point here is there's been long-term decline in passenger numbers in the bus industry since the 1980s, and only really kind of two exceptions to that in the last 40 or so years. The first was after the deregulation of bus services. There was a small increase then, and we saw a slightly more sustained increase after the introduction of concessionary passes in the mid-2000s. But if you take the 10 years prior to the pandemic, between 2009 and 2019, we saw a drop of 22% from 130 million passenger journeys in Wales to 101 million. Now, there's a huge range of factors affecting that. Increase in affordable finance for cars, for example, wider road policy, congestion, lots going on there. But the predominant factor in that is service reduction. Now, there's some nuance in that service reduction because that has largely been driven by a reduction in government support. So over the period I referred to, the reduction in supported miles, those run through tendered contracts, has gone down by more than 50%, whereas the commercial mileage run by operators in Wales has increased by about 5-6% in the same period. So we already faced a challenge pre-COVID. COVID has come along and blown a hole in everything. So we all know what the impact of that was on public services across the board. We were in a position of hardly anybody being on the bus throughout the pandemic. But we've then also seen the slowest recovery from that pandemic in terms of passenger numbers across the UK. So, again, lots of factors there. We know that we had the tightest lockdown restrictions and the slowest opening. We've also seen much more in terms of kind of public sector working from home. We're hosting this meeting virtually today. So there's lots going on, which is driving that reduction in passenger numbers and meaning that the industry has to adapt to a new world. But that recovery is still slow. So currently we're around 80% of pre-COVID passenger numbers, but the concessionary recovery in particular in Wales has been poor. So we've not seen concessionary passengers come back in huge numbers. I think real variation across the piece, but 50 to 60% in some areas. So a huge drop off there. And traditionally Wales has also been the most reliant part of the UK on those concessionary journeys to sustain the industry and to make it commercially viable. Now, at the same time, over the last 3 years, we've seen costs for bus operators increase by more than 25%. So largely driven by increasing staff and fuel costs. And all of this has tipped what was a finely balanced commercial model off kilter, and means that many services aren't commercially viable anymore. So the funding that's been provided by government over recent years, the BES funding, you'll all be familiar with it, has been hugely important in sustaining those services, hugely valued by the industry, and the industry is enormously grateful for that support from Welsh Government. But we're not out of the woods yet, and that recovery still hasn't got us to a position where we would be out of the woods were that funding to come to an end tomorrow. Now, if that funding ended tomorrow and we return to a commercial-only network, we'd likely see around 20% of services cut in Wales. That hides huge regional variations, hides huge nuance around, particularly in rural areas. That might be the viability of a whole operator. We might see bus services withdrawn from whole communities. It's not just about 15-20% across the board. It also hides the complexity of frequency changes and service amendments that would be needed to sustain commerciality in some places. So to give an example, in one part of Wales, we've been working through this. It's estimated that only 20% of services in that region would remain untouched, because they would also, as well as those cuts, they would also be the changes to frequency and the amendments you would see. So it's a really difficult position we find ourselves in. It's not, there's no straightforward route out of this. And we all share the vision and aspirations around this table of growing the bus industry, moving people towards more sustainable transport and realising the benefits of that. But the starting point is much more difficult today than it was pre-pandemic.
Thank you for that. And the BERS funding is something that the committee is going to come back to in detail in the session, certainly. Scott, is there anything that you would add to that? And if I can also ask a supplementary question to that to you, is there anything in addition to government support or complementing any government support that you think could be done to try to bring about changes in people's habits so that people decide to want to go on the bus more, so that we learn from maybe other parts of the UK, like London, other parts of the world, where it is more of a social norm across, for everyone to get the bus to work, for that to be more of a norm? Do you think that that is just government support, or do you think there are other behavioural things that could be used to bring that about, please?
Thank you. I think I'll start off with a more positive view on passenger numbers. We're starting to see growth across the Wales now, and it's something that's happened over the past 4 to 6 months because we've had reasonable stability in networks. So customers are relying on these services and can see they are being reliable. The factor affecting that is now, with BES about to collapse effectively, we're going to see potential changes in networks, and that's one thing that customers across the world will rely on. If my bus is reliable, I know it's going to come, I'm going to get it. And that's one of the things that modal shift is shown to work if that's there. If we remove funding just now from BES, then we're going to lose that reliability, going to lose some services, and potentially we'll lose customers forever after COVID. They're coming back. The concessions is a big concern, simply because there needs to be a piece of work done on this, on why they're not coming back. They are coming back to the coach business, so they're going back onto coaches across the UK, but they're not coming back onto buses, and they're on the coach a lot longer than they're on a bus. So I would be welcoming a big piece of work on this to find out why. You ask a question about what can be done. Well, I think we all recognise that reform is required post the Transport Act of 85 and the regulations of 86. That's a given, I think. And I think that we have to look at not just funding over the next 3 to 4 months or panic measures about how can we sustain buses, but we're looking at 5 or 10 years proper plan on services. My concern about that now is that if we are starting to see growth and we pull the rug from under us, those passengers will leave, and our starting position will be a lot lower given whatever we do to reform the system beyond even June, beyond March 31st next year. So I think reform is required, and I think we have to take some examples across the Europe especially on how it's done. There's a lot of models out there of public-private, private only that do work, but it comes across as being the network is so important. What is it people require to do? What do they want it for? How do we get that person out of his car into bus? How can we do a reallocation of road space? How we can get local authorities on side that car is not king anymore? We can't sustain it much longer than what it is. So all these things have to be brought into the forum. Let's get them talked about. Let's not hide behind little corners of rooms saying, oh, this is bad and that's bad. Let's openly say what it is. We can't afford to continue using cars, and city centres especially. And I can give the examples of Newport, my own operation, is we're now at 44 electric vehicles. And where I'm seeing growth is on the services that have the electric vehicles. So it's clearly a mandatory thing from the customers making that choice of coming across to an environmental choice to electric vehicles. So we should be using that information and data that we're happy to provide as an industry. You see that in Cardiff and Newport, to show that working. But I don't think there's one solution to do all, unfortunately, Delith. I think it'll be a very vast amount of different angles to do it. It will require public support. It will require private support as well. We can do this together, and this partnership working has to be the way forward. Why should government be facing big, massive bills for supporting the bus industry when we can come to the table with a variety of solutions and money as well? And especially in the electric and part of this as well. There's a lot of money out there in the power side of things that are looking to help us do this kind of work. So I think there's a whole plethora of different issues there that we can take on board. But there is a better way, absolutely. Please don't pull the rug from under us just now when we're seeing some growth in passenger levels now, or else you're going to have a bigger mountain decline going forward. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Delith. You covered a lot of ground, the two of you there, in your opening remarks. But sorry, it was remiss of me not to welcome Helydd Fychan and Carolyn Thomas to our committee this afternoon. And Carolyn, you'd like to come in on this?
Can I just get clarification on that figure, percentage figure of concessionary fares that have not come back? So is it 50 to 60% have not come back, or 40% not come back?
Yeah, it varies across Wales, but 50 to 60% have come back, and that's an average figure. There will be variations. So, you know, some are telling me it's closer to kind of 3/4 have returned, but kind of across the piece, we're looking at 50 to 60% have returned.
Okay, and regarding routes that are commercially viable, on top of the BES grant, they also receive the BSSG and money towards fuel, don't they? So if you remove that as well, then would they be commercially viable at all?
No, absolutely not.
Thank you. And Scott, for you, the question to move these people that with concessionary passes to get them back on. I've also heard that they are moving to private bus companies, so they're still booking trips, and coach trips are growing so much. So do you think that not returning concessionary fare payers, it could be something to do with confidence? Confidence maybe, or reliability, because if you book a trip, you know when that bus is going to turn up, where it's going, how long it will take, and it would definitely bring you back home in time. So do you think that post-COVID is that confidence of coming back onto buses?
I think post-COVID, it's definitely, we had politicians saying don't go on public transport. We understand why. We need the same politicians to say, do you know what, we support bus, get back on it. And I've said out publicly a challenge to Mark to do that, get out there and show support for public transport, because people will follow what you say, and they clearly have done.
And finally, on that, so do you think it would be worthwhile now doing a campaign before the BES support ends at the end of July? Do a campaign now to get those concessionary fare payers, concessionary passengers back on public transport, rather than wait till the end of July?
My fear is if we do a campaign now and then July it comes and we start to cut services, politically that would be probably an absolute nightmare, and operationally that would be causing more complaints. You're promoting this and you've just now cut my bus service. So I think there's a combination of two things at the same time. It requires a campaign, absolutely. Do we require funding to 31st of March to get us there and give you time to then do something different and reform? Absolutely.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn. Very helpful indeed there. Could I just ask you, can you let us into the trade secrets here? How are the discussions going with Welsh Government, specifically on the bus emergency scheme funding? Is it, as you described, Scott, that is now dead in the water? It is going to go on a date as described? Or is there talk around any phasing or any other funding that's been talked about, or any possibilities? Because you've described this, Scott, a potentially very bright future, as long as we can get through this current impasse where the cliff edge of funding appears right in front of us. So how are the discussions going? What can you tell us?
The transparency and openness of officials is very good now. We're having very constant discussions with them about what's required. I think their challenge is the amount of funding available to them, and the quantum is basically unspent monies on the concession affairs budget because of the lack of travellers there. I think that's not going to be enough to get us through to March 31st. I think that's been recognised by the officials and the DM, to be fair. But I think that restrictive-wise, and it's something I've been saying publicly, is that I think across the whole government, and especially the cabinet, they should look at the portfolios and look at the effect that bus services going would do to their own portfolio, and say, no, let's support bus. I think ministers must prioritise protecting vital bus services, or else we'll not have that going forward beyond this period of we're seeing as some growth. Some growth being maintained is ultimately going to benefit the public funding, because you require less as more services become viable. So I think we have to find some way, I don't know what that is internally, but some way of maintaining all the services that we have just now to 31st of March to give officials time to reform.
I would agree.
Anything you want to add to that? And I wonder if you want to touch, and I'll come back to you, Scott, on this, what the Minister has described as the transitional period, the fact that he's found, some money to extend this period so that we can have those discussions and so on. Scott has described there's still a gap there, but Aaron, what's your take on it?
So I would agree with that, and I think the situation as of today is that there's really strong partnership working with officials. We're meeting daily, and with the Deputy Minister who's having a weekly call with the industry, and I think there is genuine partnership working to try and find a way through this. The operators have identified the routes that won't stack up commercially after the end of BES, shared that information on the costs of sustaining that with Transport for Wales and with officials and local authorities, and the sums are being done behind the scenes as we speak to kind of work out what the bill would be to sustain the current network. I think, as Scott says, the reality is any funding that's available is not likely to be enough. But we're not talking about hundreds of millions of pounds here, and I think the sad reality of the impact of that in terms of potential job losses, in terms of, and when we talk about job losses, we're talking about people who won't return to the industry. If they find other jobs, they're not going to come back and be a bus driver again in 6 or 12 months, should we resolve the situation then. Is it worth throwing that out for what could be £5 or £10 million, perhaps a little bit more? And I think that's a consideration we need to see, not just from the Deputy Minister, who I think has said this really strong commitment to buses, but from across the cabinet table, and the impact that has, as Scott says, on wider services. I think the other thing I would say here is pace is really, really key, and we really had to put a bit of fire under government to get things moving quickly. If services are to be cut, there are legal requirements for the industry to deregister routes and register new routes. There are legal requirements in terms of potential redundancy consultations should jobs be put at risk, and we're in a position where those things need to start kicking off in the next few weeks, and uncertainty will breed those things happening, perhaps unnecessarily, if funding is found. So the industry needs certainty as soon as we can possibly have it from the Deputy Minister and from officials. And I think that's where we are falling out at the moment, is getting that pace and getting that movement happening as quickly as we can. There is still lots of unknowns, and we're all kind of working in the dark a little bit as to what the final solution might be.
Scott, just back to you for any further comments you want to add, but Aaron has just thrown a figure at us quite helpfully, 5 to 10 million. Is that in the ballpark?
I think that with respect to Aaron, it's kind of calculated guesses here, but I think that you're not far away from that, on top of the 20 million underspend on MCF, if that's what it is, concessionary fares. And that's the sad part of this. Do you really want to throw away an industry for the sake of 8 to 10 million? And one of my own, I think, Quebec's bugbears is that we're chucking an immense amount of money at rail. Now, I understand that rail is a different dynamic, a different cost base, but we're protecting that hand over fist. for the sake of another 10 million to get us to March 31st next year, or whatever that may be. If it is 20 million total, it's not a big quantum of funding given comparison to what you have in rail, given that 76% of the public who travel choose bus and 24% choose rail. So effectively, we're going to affect a higher percentage of people because not supporting bus services.
Okay, brilliant. Look, what I'm going to do is we're going to come back and delve into some of those related issues in a moment. But I'm going to go on to Carolyn. Now, Carolyn, you had your hand up anyway, so please go ahead with whatever you wanted to pick up on the last line of questioning, but take us also into the other areas that you wanted to as well.
Okay, it was just regarding the underspend in concessionary fares. And I wondered if that is something that is being looked at to fill this gap in funding.
Yes, they have. They've been openly stating that fact, that there is an underspend. They've not quite got a handle yet on what that is yet, but that has been there, and I think they've already said that that would be used to protect the bus services. So yes, on that fact.
And when you're saying 31st of March, you mean until the next financial year, 31st of March, rather than ending 24th of July?
Simply to give officials time to reform properly and not just fill us another knee-jerk reaction in a very short space of time.
And the impact on the learner traveller measure?
That's significant. I think I can speak quite well on this one because of Newport Transport. We've got 30 buses go out every day to take learner travels to school, and there's a difference there between those who can achieve a season ticket and those who can't. Those who can't achieve a season ticket are then commercial passengers, and the numbers don't stack up to continue these vehicles.
Okay, because it's been taught about how many school children use the commercial vehicles. We call them commercial, even though they're not commercially viable, you know, the public transport. But it's all mixed, isn't it? Interrelated. Together, whether it's private operators, etc., they are. We need those to deliver school children and the learner traveller measure.
We do indeed, but don't think that just protecting learner travel is going to be the caveat to solving all the problems. Sorry, it's just not. I've heard that said before.
No,
sorry.
No, I get that. I understand totally. It's so interwoven. So we've already touched on the current state of discussions within Welsh Government on the bus emergency scheme. So it sounds like it's ongoing at the moment, the conversations, which is really good. And the fact the draft budget initially included 28 million, but 4 weeks later it was in doubt. So when and where were you aware of this change?
They came to us in February, beginning of February, to say that all budgets were being looked at, and that was when the process then started to remove funding, or funding was not being secured beyond 31st of March 23. And then subsequently through February into March, there was a recognition that they had to do something to extend, to allow themselves time to consider all these avenues, and then that 28 million was used to get us to 24th of July 2023. So our gap now is July 24th, 2023 to March 31st, 24.
Okay, and that the BES grant was brought in, I think, because it was like COVID recovery funding, wasn't it? Which is now not there from UK government to Welsh government. But there is that BSSG funding as well, which is quite significant. I think is that 150 million or something like that. Do you know how much that is? That comes in
25 million for BSSG, and it was cut by 27% in 2014, and hasn't received any indexation increase since then. So it's not 150; it's 25 million.
25 million. Okay, and then do you also still get the fuel allowance as well?
No, BSSG replaced BSOG. BSOG was the fuel allowance that was replaced back in 2012-13 to BSSG, and based on mileage, not on fuel usage.
Okay, great, thank you. And okay, so
Caroline, we might return to some of these matters subsequently. That made sense to go ahead there, to leap ahead to your questions. But I wonder if we can just go slightly backwards, because I think we can delve into these in some more detail in one. Janet, I wonder if we can come to you for the questions around the pressures around the sheer volume of transport-related issues.
Yes, so thank you, Chair. The leadership of the WLGA has written to the First Minister outlining the impact of what it describes as the sheer volume of transport-related issues. Do you agree with this analysis? And if so, can you give details of how the sheer volume is impacting on the sustainability and recovery of bus services? I would just also add that we know when lots of the legislation that comes through Welsh Government, much of it does have implications in terms of resources for local authorities, so there'll be the pressure from, you know, the enforcement side of things as well. But yeah, just wondered what you thought about the sheer volume of transport-related issues.
Yeah, I'm happy to come in first on that. It's really difficult for local government colleagues at the moment, and our local government colleagues are key really to kind of that network planning and strategic transport role that they have. You know, budgets have been stretched over a number of years, and an enormous amount of capacity and expertise has been lost. So we find ourselves in the position today, or an enviable position today, of having to work through some of the issues that we've already described at pace, while also trying to deliver that policy, that policy change that you've just described, Janet. And I think we challenge ourselves in Wales quite a lot on the delivery gap between policy and outcome, and the capacity of local authorities to deliver under that pressure is absolutely one of the reasons that we often don't get that right. I mean, when it comes to the wider policy issues, I think the overwhelming sense I've had from the industry on things like the 20-mile-an-hour decision, the roads review, upcoming proposals around clean air and congestion charges is that the industry need to feel more involved in the consultation and decision-making process. And I think bus and coach can often be forgotten. So while some of these policy decisions have aspirational aims to get people onto public transport, our vehicles use the same roads as cars and the same infrastructure, and buses and coach need to be a key consideration within that. You know, speaking to Cardiff Bus a couple of weeks ago, they were talking about the difficulty at the moment of planning their service changes, whilst also trying to plan for the number of huge events that will be taking place in Cardiff this summer, which mean they have to redivert their routes. Are they going to have a decision on 20-mile-an-hour rollout for September? They don't know. And when I talked about legal requirements, deregistration, registration of changes, all of those sorts of things, that plays in. There are timescales that bus operators have to legally abide to make the sorts of changes that are required here. So the pressure on local government is huge, but it also then plays out in the industry as well. And we just need, it's not a call on government to not do those things. Those things are important, and I don't think there would be huge. I mean, there'd be some contention around some of those decisions, but we're not going to have a huge falling out on those. But the volume of them at the same time creates an enormous amount of pressure and complication.
Thank you. And also, will the new governance system for public transport be effective, particularly considering the role of Transport for Wales and corporate joint committees?
So I'll let Scott talk a little bit more about the corporate joint committees, because he's probably got a bit more experience at a local level. I think when it comes to Transport for Wales, we're seeing Transport for Wales kind of emerge into the bus space in a much bigger way, particularly over the last few weeks as we plan for the post-BES world. And I think what we need is greater clarity over what that role exactly is. Transport for Wales has grown as an organisation. It's recruited a growing number of people from local authorities with bus expertise, and the relationships at times, I think, with local government have been strained. And I think Transport for Wales would acknowledge that, and would acknowledge that they've got work to do with bus operators and with the industry to talk about and make clearer what their role is. I suppose the worry is TFW, or the vision of Welsh Government, is TFW will have an even greater role in future with franchising and all that stuff going on. But we kind of sleepwalking into that position at the moment. There's no absolute clarity and absolute communication of where they are playing the role. So they're plugging gaps in local authority capacity with some of the BES stuff, but we need more certainty around that. And at a local level, some of that tension has played out in operators feeling as if they're almost mediating between local government and Transport for Wales. So I've had a number of operators say, you know, it's not my role to be a mediator between these two kind of governmental bodies. I'm here to deliver bus services and I want to play that role, but I'm increasingly having to step into that space. So I think, yeah, a bit more clarity around the role, a bit more certainty about where that's heading would be welcomed.
Really good responses there, Aaron, because we've got first-hand experience here in Aberconwy, where they took a really important bus route out. And so it was the bus operators, Welsh Government and Transport for Wales, and and the local authorities, and all that succeeded. I had the bus operators wanting to work with Transport for Wales, Transport for Wales wanting to work local bus operators wanted to work with local government and Welsh government. In the end, it's a mess. We've still not got our service back, and it's been purely down to a lack of response from Transport for Wales, just not getting engaged, even though they are one of the partners. So how effective do you believe that the Transport for Wales is going to be, given that its increasing role in transport, its increasing role in governance, its increasing role in planning, and its increasing role in delivery? I haven't got that much confidence when this was a very relatively small scheme. But tell me I'm wrong, please.
I think the counter to that would be it's a relatively young organisation that is still kind of finding its feet, and that's where some of that uncertainty about its role comes from. I think there is real value. Scott talked at the start about almost the need for an overall vision and strategy here for kind of where we're heading in a post-COVID world.
Absolutely right. I agree with Scott on that.
There's a real opportunity for a national body to set the tone and to set that policy direction and provide us with a framework to work within. And I don't think there would be any huge resistance to that. But what we can't lose within that is then local accountability and local expertise and knowledge, which local authorities have. So we have to get the interaction between those two organisations right.
Thank you. I agree entirely.
Scott, did you want to come in on this? And Carolyn, just to forewarn you, I think you'd indicated previously you wanted to come in. But Scott, anything you want to add at this moment?
Please. I think I'm known for being a TFW basher because they're not ready for it yet. And I've been public. I'm very honest, unfortunately, to my detriment sometimes. Are TFW ready for bus now? No. Have they got a lot to learn? Yes. Can they? Yes. Not in 12 months. And not in 2 years. They can do it. It took Transport Scotland nearly 9 years to get to where they are now. And then it became a very big monster to control. But I think that you have to get clear a policy. There's not clear policy on what bus is just now or what you want from bus. There's this anomaly that says the networks are not right, or this is not right, or that's not right. Okay, well, show us then. Talk to us. We'll help you do it. We have the expertise in our industry, and I can see this as a Newport Transport Managing Director. Cardiff Bus and Newport Bus, by default, you own. Sweat the asset. Ask us questions. We won't charge you £1,000 a day unless you want to pay that. I'm quite happy to take it. But no, we have to, and where to start from, we're starting in the wrong position. We're trying to fix this one switch across Wales. Won't happen in bus. It's far too complex. It can't happen in local and national government. Again, it's far too complex. Start off regionally. Build your CJCs properly, give them power, the funding to do so, get the expertise built up through there, have TFW as an overarching control body, if you like, that can learn as they go along, but you have to do it regionally, and then ask the regions to produce a regional transport plan. That will then feed into the rest of Wales. We're trying to do something here. There doesn't appear to be a plan. It's about, we need to change the networks. We need to sort this. We need to sort that. Well, where's the plan? Where can I refer to it says, yeah, I'm on that stage here. I can do this next. And we are so willing to be a part of all that as an industry and to use our expertise to help Transport for Wales and government and local authorities. But we're not quite there yet. And I think the CJCs are absolutely the right place to start, not the knee-jerk, what can we do now and change it in a couple of months' time.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Carolyn.
Okay, thank you. Well, following a decade of austerity, we've lost a lot of technical transport officers within local government. So do you believe that they just seem to be circulating between Transport for Wales then and local authorities and going over to other sectors? So do you think that the shortage of expertise of pool of officers is an issue? So you can't increase Transport for Wales expertise without taking from local authorities, but those local authority officers are still needed to deliver local transport and also to deliver through local authorities and the CJCs as well. And also the BSSG is divided up between regions, so North Wales and other regions, and then again between each local authority. based on a formula, because each local authority area is different, as well as each region is different. So each area gets different amounts of funding. So do you believe, Scott, because you mentioned it, you've said that transport should be managed on regions because of that local knowledge, but do you think that's still doable? Because local authority areas are very diverse in their own right as well. So I remember, at Flintshire, there were 450 bus contracts, or bus and taxi contracts. 350 were school contracts. Wrexham is very different. Wrexham's based around the city of Wrexham. And Denbighshire is very different again. So just your view really on that, on having that expertise, whether it's deliverable through CJCs, etc. Thank you.
I think the education piece is there. We've got to build to go forward. So you have what you have just now, but why can't we then start to bring people in and train them on the industry sector purely on bus? And as has happened previously in Scotland, in both directions, we've had Transport for Scotland people come out to work in the industry, and people in the industry work in Transport for Scotland to share that knowledge set across the piece, to have a mutual understanding. And that worked many years ago, and I was party to that. I worked for Transport for Scotland on comment from Stagecoach many years ago, to do exactly that. So the skill set's not there, but you have got still some skill set there to build on with the regional aspect of the industry. So I think, yes, you can still do it. Yeah, it's a hard one. It's a difficult one to do, but I just think we have to start someplace, and you'll not start it doing it nationally. You'll have to do it regionally. Yeah. The local areas, yeah, if I take you back pre-2000s to Scotland, when they had the same situation here before they had the transport partnerships, RTPs up in Scotland, they had the same problem, and they went regional and through the RTPs, and that worked very well. And then it gave Transport Scotland time to build up the skill sets to what they have just now, and the RTPs now work closely with Transport Scotland. I'm not saying it's perfect. It's a massive organisation that's very costly and takes in road, rail, ferry, the whole lot now. But the vision was still the same as what Transport for Wales vision was. I was an advocate many years ago of asking for this kind of organisation in Wales as a starting point. It's just that what we expect from that organisation immediately, I think, is flawed.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. In which case, if we could move on to another section then, Helen, I think you're going to take us into modal shift.
I am, and good afternoon both. And you've covered much of what I was going to ask actually in terms of, I think Scott, you mentioned in terms of reform, and you've highlighted in terms of the withdrawal, what it might mean in terms of the modal shift target. You've also warned us what it would mean in terms of the delivery of the Welsh Government's bus reform legislation. I just wonder really, are there any other points you'd like us to take into account in terms of the modal shift and so on, or things, beyond extending bus funding, which obviously you've outlined very clearly to us? Are there other things that you think we can and should be doing as a matter of urgency? Because it seems like we are discussing about the future of bus services for many of our communities, and we know the devastating impact that would have.
It varies across Wales in different areas. You've got rural and urban areas, the south, mid and west, and north, as you know, how Wales is set up. So you have different challenges in different areas. I think from a modal shift point of view, we have to look at congestion in the cities. We have to stop car being king. I think that's happening across the UK and Scotland in various areas to varying degrees. We have to look at road reallocation. We have to look at planning going forward. The planners have the control of all these areas going forward. So we need to be involved in that kind of aspect to make sure that we think about bus before we plan a road or a scheme or an estate, not afterwards and think, oh, okay, how do we get a bus in there? So that's fundamental going forward. And I can see that DFW being that controlling guide point of all this when they get to that stage. And that's how it happens up in Transport Scotland. But I think that we have to think about the congestion issue. We have the M4 and the Burns system going forward just now. They are looking at different things in the southeast of Wales. For me, I want to see delivery quicker, but we can't do that delivery quicker if all the ministers are all panicking about budgets all the time and where money's coming from. It's quite frustrating for you, I'm sure it is for everybody else. But I think that the biggest risk to us going forward is continually the congestion increasing. We're seeing it on a Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, we're seeing massive increase in congestion, even pre-pandemic levels, which is worrying. So clearly they're opting to work from home on a Monday and Friday and go to work on a Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. The 470 is rammed on these days, the M4 is rammed on these days. So my worry is that if we lose bus services, you'll then force people who've got no choice to go and buy a diesel guzzling car, cheap car, and then your whole environmental targets go, your Future Generations Act goes out the window. So I think that to achieve modal shift, we've got to start by protecting what we have, and then very clearly have a plan, a regional transport plan, to go back to this, about how you attack all these issues. I think that's the way forward.
Yeah, I would agree with all Scott said there. I think we did a piece on modal shift earlier in the year, which the committee's heard about previously, but that set out, we need to I think increase patronage levels by 148% to reach current modal shift targets, and actually on current policy basis we would only get about 34% of the way there. So a lot of what Scott described makes up that mix and that policy package we need to kind of reach that bigger target. And I think that the really important thing in terms of the impact of what's happening now on modal shift is every decision on network changes today will have an impact in the future. Firstly, in terms of drivers, fleet, and our ability to kind of grow into the future if we lose any of those as a result of any cuts. But for every person that's not able to catch a bus because of those service changes after July the 24th, there's a decision to make. And our polling, which we've just commissioned, haven't published yet, our polling shows that about 40% of people in Wales would choose to use a car if their bus service is no longer available. And that just completely undoes what we're trying to achieve on modal shift. And as we talked about earlier, gets people out of the habit of catching a bus. And that habit forming, that behavioural change, is a really important part of that policy package we need towards modal shift. Now, just to share one kind of anecdote, I don't get much public correspondence in my role in a trade body, but I've had 3 or 4 people get in touch in the last week directly to talk about the impact on their lives of potential bus service changes. One person who talked about no longer being able to get to their job because the only route to their job is likely to be one of the routes that will be cut were their service changes post-BES. We're talking about real life impact here as well. It's easy to talk about long-term aspirational targets. It's easy to talk about the impact on the climate and the impact on jobs, but these are real life decisions, people potentially choosing not to be able to get to work anymore. And once those decisions are made, it's very hard to get them back on a bus and to re-establish a network that has the confidence of those people who've lost the service in the past.
Thank you, Aaron. I think that's really powerful, and I think I certainly echo in terms of my own casework. I represent South Wales Central, varying degrees of car ownership. Area like Glencoch has the highest percentage, I think, in terms of non-car ownership. So it's not a matter that they have alternative means of transport either, and perhaps that gets lost sometimes, that human impact of there not being a bus. So I thank you for reflecting on that. In terms of your message then, I think I don't want to put words into your mouth, but in terms of that modal shift, I think I'm hearing, and please correct me if I'm wrong, a very clear warning to us as a committee, therefore, that even what we have now is at risk if this doesn't continue, but that we need a plan to ensure that that modal shift happens and every announcement is joined up. Is that a fair summary of where we're at in your view?
Absolutely. I think that a regional plan to feed into a national plan is required. And I think it's not just now, it's next 3, 5, 10 years. What is it you want to achieve? And specific delivery deadlines based on those 3, 5, 10 years plan. That requires funding for 3, 5, 10 years as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. And I'm going to come to Janet in a moment. We've delved into funding quite a lot, understandably, in this session. It's not all to do with funding, it's also to do with longer term plans as well. But funding is a real and urgent and pressing issue. But before I do that, you've talked about this need for this strategy. The minister has talked publicly about using this moment, whatever you call it, emergency cliff edge funding, whatever, as an opportunity to do that. He seems to have touched on some of these themes of saying, let's grab this moment to actually rethink how we do public transport, modal shift, more connected, more integrated services. Can I just ask you, Scott and Aaron, a short answer? Do you think ministers and Welsh Government is in the right space in the discussions currently going on, that you're getting a hearing on this real shift in thinking that we need to use this as an opportunity?
Yes, I think we have. I think we've got, I think across the UK, I think buses being spoken about by government ministers far more than ever before, that I've ever recognised in my 25 years in the industry. What I do not think there is a realisation of impact on timings. I think that the pressure being placed on officials, local and national, is the wheels of motion do not move quickly in government. And to do a complete reform and change in 3 or 6 or 9 months, I don't think is doable. It just doesn't work that quickly, unfortunately. So the aspirations there, yes, but I think the timescales required are not there, and the DM's being forced into having to do this based on a short timescale, given the funding strategy that they've got.
Okay, thanks. Aaron, park your thoughts for the moment. We'll come back to you because time is against us. So Janet, let's come to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. The witness's response to the Deputy Minister's 1st of March comment that a 3-month notice period was being given on the withdrawal of funding in Wales, while England was experiencing a more severe cliff. Can we have some comments around that, please?
I'm happy to come in on that. CPT works across the UK, and I've obviously been working closely with colleagues in England and Scotland. I would say that colleagues' experience in England and Scotland aren't vastly different to those I've had in my first few months here at CPT. And I'm not sure how much use there is in saying our cliff edge is better than yours, to be honest. The position in England is much like the position here. There's huge uncertainty. And I think they've got 7 weeks to go until the emergency funding comes to an end without any sense of where that's going. Now, colleagues are engaged there and hopeful of a settlement, but they do also face a cliff edge. We're in a similar situation here. Now, every nation in Great Britain, we represent the 3 nations Great Britain, has faced huge uncertainty. I think the minimum expectation would be that we have 3 months notice on what's next. Now, we've had a good amount of notice on the funding coming to an end, but we've not yet resolved the what next question. And the key issue here is that uncertainty just breeds risk aversion and breeds difficulty of making long-term decisions. So take, for example, the aspiration to decarbonise the fleet and to decarbonise buses. Why would a bus operator in England, Scotland or Wales invest significant sums in its fleet if it doesn't know what services it will be running in 3 months' time? And those are the questions we're grappling with across the piece. I think just to take one example of perhaps where it has worked quite well across the UK. Scottish Government, the emergency funding has come to an end there. And the way in which they managed that process, I would say, was done pretty effectively. So there was a Scottish Government Bus Task Force, which had 3 subgroups on patronage growth, driver shortages and community engagement. That task force is ongoing and will conclude in the summer with a set of recommendations. But that has kind of worked through lots of what happens next throughout that process. And my sense is that in Wales, we've been engaged so much in the crisis of how do we avoid doomsday here, that we're not able to look up and have some of those conversations around modal shift and patronage growth. The warning sign I would give from Scotland is that when that funding came to an end, we saw fare increases of an average of 12%. And that is a real balancing act that operators in Wales are going to have to strike as we come out of BERS. How do we make sure that fares are good value for money and reflect, what it ultimately is a cost of living crisis? Sorry, just one final note on that. I know we're short on time. Is in Scotland, we've also seen, and Carolyn referred to campaign earlier, we've also seen Scottish Government jointly funding a marketing campaign, and that messaging about getting people back on the bus as we come out of this uncertainty is really, really important, and it's important that that's done in partnership. So, something we're already having conversations with Welsh Government about, but we'd like to see much more of. But I'd say, the experiences are pretty similar across the UK. Cliff Edge breeds uncertainty, and no one's doing it particularly well.
Okay. So the fact.
Sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah. So the fact that withdrawal of COVID emergency funding in England was initially announced in August 22, and then of course the withdrawal date was subsequently extended from 31st of March this year to 30th of June this year. How this longer notice period affected the ability of operators and local authorities to adjust to the new funding levels. You've answered my second question about how the approach taken to post-COVID funding in Wales compares to that in Scotland.
I think the only thing I've done is series.
I just wonder if we can throw that in the last minute that we have to Scott there for anything that he might want to add on it, if you have a UK-wide perspective.
Just think about Scotland for a minute, that they also have free transport for under 23-year-olds. So your commercial market is now 23 to 60. So at each end, it's free transport covered by government. So there's a different dynamic up there compared to down here. We all face similar problems. And I think the realizations come across all governments. There has to be some kind of funding going forward. Wales have been very upfront in saying very quickly we require reform, we want change, and I would support that. Let's just not do it in 3 months.
Okay, thank you very much. Listen, Joyce, you've been very, very patient, and I know we've touched on aspects of school transport, but can we hand to you for the final word then, the final question?
Final question, and we haven't got much time. So is there scope in future to improve the sustainability of both learner traveller and commercial bus services through joint or more closely joined up working?
So,
yes, I can answer that question. We do it in Newport now currently. We operate a season ticket as opposed to A to B coaches to school. So the learners might jump on 1 or 2 buses to get to school, and they use normal bus services. I think that we have to look at learner travel in the mix about how you reform public transport. That includes hospitals, that includes patient movements. I think there's a whole transport issue here that we have to address. And you may get efficiencies of scale out of that, but you may have to put some pump prime money into it as well. But I think there's so many disjointed areas that you can bring together. But again, that won't happen in 2 or 3 months. It will happen with a proper planned progress report across 12, 18 months, 2 years.
Yeah, Scott's right. It's about join up across the piece here. And the Deputy Minister's been really clear in the conversations around BES that school transport is a priority for Welsh Government, and it's a priority for the industry. But we need to be careful not to manipulate the whole network around school transport. It is part of the picture and not the whole picture. So if we were to manipulate it around school transport, we potentially lose some of those wider benefits bus provides in terms of social, economic, and otherwise, and those networks may not then stack up or survive. So, join up's important. There's also a role for education. Scott and others have talked openly with government about, the need for flexibility from schools around start times. That can potentially make things more efficient and allow for flexibility locally. So I think they would be the only 2 things I'd say on learner transport.
That's it, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Joyce. Thank you for your evidence today. It's been very, very helpful. If there's anything else you want to share with us over the next few days, you go away and you think, I really wish I'd have said that, then drop us a line to our clerking team immediately. That'd be really helpful. Thanks for your evidence. We'll send to you the transcript as per normal, so you can check through it for accuracy and so on. But genuinely, thank you very much. We wish you well in your discussions over the next few weeks and months. We're all hopeful that we can come out of this on the picture that you painted on the other side, Scott and Aaron, which is that if we can get through this, we get through to a stable and a better future for public transport and modal shift and zero carbon and all of that within Wales. We just need to get through this. But it's been an important evidence session today to shine a light on some of it. Thank you very much. We're going to let you go now. Colleagues, we got a very rapid turnaround now before the next session with the WLGA and others. Could I ask, please, if you can rapidly do whatever you need to do before you come back. We're going to start at 1:30 bang on. So rush off, make a cup of tea or whatever you need to do, and I'll see you back here in a couple of minutes.
And I'll be leaving you. I'll see everybody next week in Cardiff. Thank you.
Janet.
Bye.
Bye-bye.